Do you think that the budget cuts and the austerity measures taken in Latin America during the last 20 years affected its ability to fight the coronavirus now?
Look, the ability to fight the coronavirus depends, among other things, on the state of the public health service and the capacity that it has, the number of public health workers who can trace and test and all those things, the hospital capacity, and that differs very much by country. And I simply don't know enough about the individual country's health services to begin to give you any answer to that one.
Now, I imagine, but I mean, as you have played a role in the IMF and in the
austerity. But the IMF worries about macro policy, and the IMF worries about fiscal and monetary policy, exchange rates, and trade. But while it's true that there are some people in the fiscal affairs department who specialize in the health part of it, that's not something that gets to upper management. That's not an issue where we could possibly spend enough time. There was too much to do already.
I know, but don't you find the IMF in some way responsible of having cut the budget in health in Latin America and the whole?
Wait a second. Well, the budget had to be cut. The budget had to be cut in Latin America. It was a choice of the individual countries where they cut the budget. The budget had to be cut because Latin America thought that it should be able to spend more than it was making and not have inflation and have the rest of the world pay. And that can't go on forever. You know, there was a budget problem because there was too many expenditures relative to taxes. Governments had a choice. They could raise taxes or they could lower expenditures. They could choose which expenditures to lower. The IMF was careful. And in fact, I was one of the many who insisted that we wanted to try to protect social expenditures from the cuts and to make sure that investment and social expenditures were held up and not the other things. But many governments just did not do it that way. But that's not the IMF's fault.
But the weight of the interests on the debt in Argentina and in other countries that had heavily indebted them during the 90s.
Yes, of course. In the 90s were a good time, and the trouble is that everybody just assumed it would go on forever, and it didn't.
But don't you find a link between those good times and the crisis after them?
Are we now back to 2008, or are we talking about the coronavirus? Which are we talking about? When are we talking?
No, the 201 and 202 crisis in Argentina. I mean, you told 90s were good times, and after the 90s we had...
From 1996 on, it was clear that Argentina was getting into trouble, and some of us even wrote earlier, because you tried to fix an exchange rate without getting rid of the underlying inflation. It was a problem, and it finally came up to a head, erupted, in 2000 and 2001. There's no question about that. It is not, however, because of what the IMF did. It is because the governments would not cut their expenditures, and they kept on insisting that the exchange rate would last, and they kept trying to keep, in the 1920s, the United Kingdom, Great Britain, tried to keep its exchange rate at an unrealistic level, and they had a recession for the 10 years. It couldn't be done. Argentina tried the same thing in the 1990s.
I ask you this now because we entered another program with the IMF in 2018.
Yes, but I told you I will not answer questions about the IMF.
I know.
About the Argentina, sorry.
About Argentina, I know, but in that program, we had to cut again our health budget. We got even...
You don't have to cut your health budget. You have to cut your budget somewhere, and there's a difference. You do not have to cut health. You have to cut. There's a big difference. You can choose where to cut.
But the IMF told us in 2018 that it wouldn't cut social expenditures, and it did, because we lost our...
The IMF did not cut them. Argentina cut them if that was Argentina's choice.
Well,
you can't go and say, I'm going to keep on spending everything forever. Yeah, and it's certainly reasonable to say that, look, if you want to work with us, and we want to be finally you to be sustainable, you need to cut somewhere in the budget. It could be raise taxes, it could be lower expenditures, okay. But then what they choose to lower is their business, not the IMF. So the IMF did not tell you to lower social expenditures.
No, what they told us was that they have changed since you were in charge. They told us, and their government told us, that this IMF was more socially concerned than yours. And it wasn't. It was the same.
2018 didn't have any comment on that.